All right, we're going to continue with They Got Their Man by Elmer Lynn Williams, a story of income tax persecution. Chapter 11, The Proctor Purse. In the trial district, Attorney Ego said, "Let me first talk a little bit about the theory of the government as to the source from which it contends the money came. The government contends that he got much of this money, if not all of it, as a tax fixer. When Malone at length disclosed where and how he got the money and produced witnesses to corroborate him, Ego assailed the story as a dream and as a defense made up after the case started. The theory of improbability was built upon the size of the sum Malone received from Colonel Proctor. But now let us revert to the presidential campaign of 1920, at which time Colonel Proctor made a political gift to Malone after Malone had performed what Colonel Proctor said was a political miracle. Colonel William Cooper Proctor. Let us first examine the financial ability and the generosity of Colonel William Cooper Proctor, as well as the habit of keeping his word, whether the bargain resulted in a bane or a blessing. When he assumed the leadership of the General Leonard Wood campaign, Colonel Proctor's wealth was put at more than $50 million. He was known for his large contributions. He gave $100,000 to the first Red Cross drive during the war, $100,000 to the second Red Cross drive, and $100,000 to the war chest. During these drives, he was told by the Reverend John Hickey, a Cincinnati clergyman, of the work of the Knights of Columbus in the war zone in Europe. The next day, Colonel Proctor, a Protestant, mailed a check to Father Hickey for $10,000 for the fund. It was estimated that Proctor purchased $10 million worth of Liberty bonds. 600 of Proctor's employees enlisted in the World War. To the families of these men, Proctor continued to pay their salaries until they returned. Many were earning $4,000 and $5,000 a year. All but 7 returned and were given their old positions. Colonel Proctor gave $500,000 to Princeton University for a graduate school. That gift was later withdrawn because the conditions were not met. It is but natural that one who took such great interest in the World War should make a great soldier his choice for president. Here, Proctor's generosity is attested by Colonel A.A. Sprague, defendant in a suit brought by Colonel Proctor. During the primary contest, when General Wood was a candidate, Colonel Proctor and Sprague guaranteed the payment of $100,000 of the many items of the campaign. When Sprague refused to pay, Proctor settled and then sued Sprague and got judgment for $62,697 in October of 1925. The judgment represented Sprague's share plus the interest. Here is the report of the opening statement of Sprague's attorney. Attorney John S. Miller, stating the case for the defense, visualized the Cincinnati manufacturer, Colonel Proctor, as a man with ambitions to be a kingmaker, who ran the campaign alone, giving orders and spending money with a lavish hand, who once, when Colonel Sprague remonstrated with him concerning the expenditures of monies, told the latter, "It's none of your business how a certain $500,000 was spent." We will show, Attorney Miller said, that there never was a so-called Leonard Wood National Campaign Committee. That so-called committee consisted of 2 groups. One of those consisted of Proctor himself, and the other of men who did what Proctor told them to do. Chicago Press, September the 24th, 1925. Charles N. Wheeler, who at the present writing is a political editor of the Chicago Daily News, and the late James O'Donnell Bennett of the Chicago Tribune, both commented upon the lavishness of Colonel Proctor in conducting the Wood campaign. Both writers maintained that he spent millions of his own money. It was during that trial that the revelation was made of Proctor's immense contributions for the Wood campaign. He admitted giving out $500,000 at one time. When Malone asked for a new trial, District Attorney Ego declared in open court that if Malone really did have the money in 1920, that the government had no case against him, yet the testimony of Malone and Gayling stands uncontradicted. Mr. Malone testified, "I had the money and it was placed in a safety deposit box in the Greenbaum Bank in 1920. William F. Gayling, who accompanied Malone in South Dakota during the presidential primaries of 1920, testified, "I saw the political gift money and went with Malone to the vaults when he placed it there. The records of the Greenbaum Bank show that Malone and one other visited the vaults on that date. After the trial, several persons reminded Mr. Malone that they knew that his testimony concerning the money was true, and they have sworn to their knowledge of it. These include Mr. Helen Wrights of Park Ridge, who served as a secretary to Mr. Malone for 9 years. Her affidavit says, I went with Mr. Malone many times to his safe deposit box in the Greenbaum Bank building during the years 1921 to 1929, during which time I was employed as his secretary. While there, I clipped coupons from his Liberty bonds and counted the money Mr. Malone testified having placed there in 1920. Robert Stagg, who has lived in Park Ridge for over 50 years and who served as Mr. Malone's secretary in the real estate business from 21 to 26, swears that on several occasions he accompanied Malone to the vault and saw the money. Miss Malone declares that on many occasions she accompanied her husband to the vault, which was under their joint control, and counted the currency she knew had been donated by Colonel Proctor. Illinois politics supplies an example of lavishness and political contributions far more difficult to believe than a gift of Colonel Proctor to William H. Malone. Yet the example used herein is to illustrate this prodigality is well authenticated in the biography of the would-be donor and is used as the basis of an editorial in a leading American journal. The story in brief is this. In 1926, Colonel Frank L. Smith was nominated to the Republican candidate for the United States Senate in Illinois. Mr. Julius Rosenwald, head of Sears Roebuck and Company, and a multimillionaire known for his many philanthropies and also civic interest, decided to back Mr. Hugh S. Magel on an independent ticket in opposition to Smith. Mr. Harold L. Ikes, now Secretary of the Interior, was McGill's campaign manager. Convinced that McGill could not win over Smith, Mr. Rosenwald approached Smith and offered him 10,000 shares of Sears Roebuck stock to withdraw from the race and thus permit McGill to win. Said Mr. Rosenwald, "If you withdraw, I am here to offer you 10,000 shares of Sears Roebuck stock the moment you sign your withdrawal notice. In a few months, that stock will be worth $750,000. By November, it was worth $1,975,000. Smith refused the offer, but did not reveal the fact until he was attacked in a book written by Dr. Carroll H. Woody of the University of Chicago. This book was financed by Rosenwald. Woody stated that Rosenwald had urged Smith to withdraw in 1926, but said nothing about Rosenwald's munificent offer. Smith, angered because of the omission, revealed the complete story, and Rosenwald admitted the truth of Smith's statement. A more recent biography of Rosenwald by Mr. M.R. Werner repeats the case in detail. The offer to Smith was nearly 4 times the sum donated by Proctor to Malone, who had won every presidential delegate in South Dakota for General Wood. That was a long shot, $500,000 or nothing. In the case of Smith and Rosenwald, only one seat in the Senate was at stake. In the case of Proctor and Malone, the presidency of the United States was the prize. Most everyone knows that great sums of money are donated to political organizations and individuals in political campaigns, and that vast stakes are invested for campaign purposes. The contribution of $600,000 by John L. Lewis to the Democratic Campaign Committee in 1936 has been admitted and widely publicized. It is public knowledge that there are a great many of such instances, yet no income tax has ever been claimed on such donations. Page 110 is a picture of black and white photo of Michael L. Igoe. He's got his eyes half closed and he doesn't look too happy. All right, Chapter 12, Igoe's Foul Blows. A swallow had built her nest under the eaves of a court of justice. Before her young ones could fly, a serpent, gliding out of his hole, ate them all up. When the poor bird returned to her nest and found it empty, she began a pitiable wailing. A neighbor suggested by way of comfort that she was not the first bird who had lost her young. "True," she replied, "but it is not only my little ones that I mourn, but that I should have been wronged in that very place where the injured fly for justice. From Aesop's Fables. The preceding chapters show that the government's grand array of witnesses did not materialize. The hundreds of persons whom the government said would testify that Malone used the office of chairman of the state tax commissioner to collect large sums of money never appeared. The prosecution had but 2 witnesses to testify as to income during the years 1929 and 30. The 2, Tuttle and Huff, said they made political contributions to Malone, in one instance for the use of political party, and in the other for Malone's personal campaign fund when he was a candidate for governor. The assistant district attorney explained in the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals that there were so few witnesses for the government that it was necessary to employ tactics used in order to get a conviction. Because there was no real evidence, District Attorney Ego, in sheer desperation, resorted to unfair, passionate, and abusive argument in order to wangle a verdict from the jury he deliberately connived to confuse. All of this occurred in the closing argument when, under the rules of court, the defendant's attorney was not allowed to answer. Igo was a member of the legislature in 1919 when Governor Loudon demanded the abolition of the Malone Board of Equalization. Igo voted for its abolition. He knew of the campaigns waged by Malone during the years that followed, in which Malone exposed the tax-dodging methods of the Pullman Company and the Chicago street car lines. He also knew that 20 long years after that fight, the attorneys for these same corporations were the only witnesses possible to produce in a determined effort to destroy their enemy. He said he had known Malone for many years. Notwithstanding these facts, Ego, in his closing argument to the jury, said, "But I will say this, that during all the years I was at Springfield, and I was there when these things were happening about which this man has testified, and he knows that I know that they never happened at all, and he knows that I know that these are things that he just drew out of the wind, and they constitute another dream on his part." The Supreme Court of the United States has ruled as late as 1935 that it is reversible error for him, district attorney, to tell the jury he has personal knowledge of a material fact. Igo further said, "I think the whole defense here is a dishonest defense by a dishonest man. I think the whole defense here is a crooked defense by a crooked man." The United States Supreme Court has also ruled that it is the duty of the trial court of its own motion to protect citizens in their right to a verdict uninfluenced by the appeals of counsel to passion or prejudice. And if this law is violated, a case will be reversed for misconduct, even though no objection was made or exception taken. Igo argued to the jury that Malone had not told his own lawyer, George K. Bowden, the source of the challenged currency items. Mr. Bowden testified, "I did ask Mr. Malone about it. He maintained that it was not money which he had obtained during any of the years under investigation, and that it was not taxable income." In order to inflame the passion of the jurors, blind their judgment, and obtain a verdict irrespective of the evidence, Igo declared, defendant had no regard for his wife, for his son, and that he sought to blacken the name of one of the heroes of the American Army, long after General Wood had passed on to his reward. Malone had testified that General Wood was not aware of Colonel Proctor's promise. Although Malone owned only 160 shares in the Citizen State Bank of Park Ridge, he made a gift of $80,000 to the bank in 1932 for the sole purpose of enabling it to weather the then panic and thus protect the depositors. No other stockholder made any donation whatever. Nevertheless, the Assistant United States District Attorney said to the jury, he loved it. He loved money. He loved money. But let me tell you something. The defendant, William H. Malone, did not have a soul. He sold it piecemeal. He had no soul. He sold it. William Malone, then and now, is not a human. Wow. Not a human being.
Wow.
He's not a human being. The man is up there with just the image of a man of clay. No soul, no mind, blessed with moral conscience. This man Malone lied. Every word he said. It was nothing but a lie, and you could see it on his craven face when he testified. Whoa, man. These prosecutors are a piece of work, aren't they? On page 114, there's a black and white photo of a sterling silver bowl It's got a real fancy lid on the top, and it's got curly cues on the sides. It says the following inscription on the beautiful silver bowl pictured here indicates the high regard the people of Park Ridge have for Mr. and Miss Malone. Presented to Mr. and Miss William Haynes Malone in grateful appreciation of their efforts to further good government in Park Ridge, April 21st, 1925. During my investigation, covering a period of over a quarter of a century, I have attended many trials in our federal courts and have examined the records of many more, including the trials at the most notorious characters of the underworld, from which Al Capone down, but never have I heard or read such vicious personal abuse heaped upon a defendant. Okay, I got to interject some personal commentary. I think my wife knows what I'm going to say already. So Ken Hovind was put in jail for structuring, and they said that he didn't pay the people that work for him taxes. And Judge Casey, what's her first name? Judge Margaret Casey Rogers gave one of the most insanely evil, child of the devil, Beelzebub speeches, right from the mouth of Lucifer speeches about Ken Hovind that you can possibly imagine. I read that speech into YouTube. All you got to do is find it. It's called Judge Margaret Casey Rogers, sentencing of Ken Hovind. But she calls him worse than a rapist. By the way, that was signed by, I think, 8 people that they heard that in an affidavit. And then all of a sudden, Judge Margaret Casey Rogers removes that from the transcript. But even if you take that part out, which that's the debated part, the other section of Margaret Casey Rogers and what she said about Ken Hovind, it's like they just come off the rails when the issue of taxes come up, and it's like they almost get satanic salary. Yeah, it's like, exactly. They're not getting paid, and they want people to pay their salary. So when you hit them in the pocketbook, they get vicious. And so I want to read that last sentence again because this is very common. It's a lot of commonalities when you read these books that go on in 1920 and 1930 with what's happening even today in in 2015, 2017, 2020. Let me read this again because this is so true, and it's even true today. I have attended many trials in our federal courts, and I have examined the records of many more, including the trials of the most notorious characters of the underworld, from Al Capone down. But never have I heard or read of such vicious personal abuse heaped upon a defendant. The same thing happened with Ken Hovind. The charge of evading the payment of income tax was not established, but there was a preponderance of evidence to disprove the claim. The charge of tax evasion carried no stigma of moral turpitude. Regardless of who was right, there was no warrant for District Attorney Ego to resort to the passionate personal abuse he so shamefully employed. So it was not the nature of the charge that aroused Ego's venom. Ego, pallbearer for Colosimo, vice lord, and character witness for George Remus, bootlegger and wife killer. Here, then, we see Ego feigning righteous indignation as an excuse for the vituperative personal attack upon a man against whom was the mere charge that he had resisted the payment of a demanded tax, one who bore a reputation beyond reproach in public and private life for over 50 years. He was finally deprived of his liberty, ruined physically and financially, while Ego, whose sordid career, but partially described here, was promoted to a federal judgeship for life. Why does that not surprise me? You got the prosecutor going after this honest dude who's trying to make, I don't even agree with taxes should be equal for everybody, but he's trying to at least hold the corporations accountable. And Ego gets a federal judgeship for life out of it. My. Why is that not surprising? The United States Supreme Court, in discussing the deference paid by the jurors to the United States attorneys, and in admonishing such attorneys not to abuse that power, said the United States attorney is the representative not of an ordinary party to a controversy, but of a sovereignty whose obligation to govern impartiality is as compelling as its obligation to govern at all, and whose interest, therefore, in a criminal prosecution is not that it shall win a case, but that justice shall be done. As such, he is in a peculiar and very definite sense the servant of the law, the twofold aim of which is that guilt shall not escape or innocence suffer. He may prosecute with earnestness and vigor Indeed, he should do so, but while he may strike hard blows, he is not at liberty to strike foul ones. It is as much his duty to refrain from improper methods calculated to produce a wrongful conviction as it is to use every legitimate means to bring about a just one. It is fair to say that the average jury in a greater or less degree has confidence that these obligations, which so plainly rest upon the prosecuting attorney, will be faithfully observed. Consequently, improper suggestions, insinuations, and especially assertions of personal knowledge are apt to carry much weight against the accused when they should properly carry none. The defendant in a criminal case is always under suspicion, and Igo, as a prosecuting attorney, was supposed to be telling the truth. In a prosecution of a criminal case, the confidence of a jury in the statements of a United States attorney is second only to the confidence they place in a judge. The United States attorney in this trial, in total disregard for both law and legal ethics, assured the jury that he had personal knowledge that Malone was lying. The result was devastating, as it was so aptly stated by counsel in the brief to the Circuit Court of Appeals. The assumption that Malone's testimony is untruthful is based entirely upon its alleged improbability. No witness testified the currency was not received from Colonel Proctor. There was no challenge in the evidence to a single statement made by Malone. Not one of the circumstances which led up to and accompanied the transaction was shown to be fabricated. It is simply affirmed the story is untrue because of the opinion of the prosecution. It is improbable. And this upon Hume's cynical formula. Where the improbable is related, the mind more easily believes the relator lied than that the improbable occurred. The improbability of the unusualness of any fact is no reason for disbelieving it. John Stuart Mill. The jury knew nothing of the long prevailing Malone Pullman Company and streetcar lines feud, and that, as a result, those corporations were his bitter enemies. They saw no reason why a district attorney of the United States should lie, so they believed Ego. No one reminded the jury that the courts have repeatedly held a juror is not at liberty to reject clear, certain, corroborated, uncontradicted, and unimpeached evidence, all of which witnesses for Malone produced, simply because he won't believe it. Some of the jurors readily admitted that they understood nothing about the questions involving thousands of dollars propounded by the district attorney and answered by the revenue agents. They said they had to believe Ego or Malone. Ego pleaded that with the jury that if they found Malone innocent, it would be equivalent of a finding that the district attorney and the other officers of the government in this particular case are so craven, so low, and so mean that they would do something that was unfair and unjust and unmanly and illegal. During the 3 years Ego served as U.S. District Attorney, he personally conducted a prosecution only once. That was the Malone trial. There, no doubt, he envisioned a chance to divert the attention of the Treasury Department in Washington from its charges that Ego had refused to prosecute his fellow henchmen of the Kelly Nash machine and had, in fact, caused to be quashed indictments which had been returned against them. He totally ignored the law when he shielded political racketeers, and he perverted the law in order to destroy an innocent man. In compelling this data, the author is reminded by an observation so ably set forth by Lord Macaulay. There is no more hazardous enterprise than that of bearing the torch of truth in those dark and infected recesses in which no light has ever shone. Investigation into this case uncovered many dark and infected recesses where the light of truth had been carefully excluded. One is reminded by Ego's personal attack upon Malone of some of the many remarkable passages in Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress and commented upon Lord Macaulay. Hey, I like that book. Bunyan satirized the way in which criminal trials were conducted under Charles II of England, holding out in bold relief the license given the witnesses for the prosecution, the shameless partiality and ferocious insolence of the judge. Ponder this gem. Judge, thou renegade, heretic, and traitor, hast thou heard what these honest men have witnessed against thee? Defendant, may I speak a few words in my own defense? Judge, Sirrah, Sirrah, thou deservest to live no longer, but to be slain immediately upon the place, yet that all men may see our gentleness to thee. Let us hear what thou vile renegade hast to say. No person who knows that the state trials can be at a loss for parallel cases, said Macaulay. The imaginary trial before the jury, composed of personified vices as depicted by Bunyan, was, according to Lord Macaulay, just and merciful compared with some real trials. In a sincere effort to determine the underlying motive for Ego's personal abuse, I find a clear explanation in Macaulay's analysis of the cruel, revengeful conduct of Lord Bacon, who, while prosecuting for Queen Elizabeth, believed himself slipping from grace, and in order to make his position more secure, with coldness of heart and meanness of spirit, he proceeded to prosecute relentlessly his old friend and benefactor, Lord Essex, with the thought, no doubt, by doing so, he would convince the rulers and the people that he, Bacon, was incorruptible, and thus pave the way for his cherished promotion. Again, I quote from Macaulay, "He, Bacon, seems to have been incapable of feeling strong affection, or of facing great dangers, or making great sacrifices. His desires were set on things below. As soon as he found that the smallest show of independence in Parliament was offensive to the Queen, he had abased himself to the dust before her, and implored forgiveness in terms better suited to a convicted thief than to a knight of the shire. For these he joined, and for these he forsook Lord Essex. He continued to plead his patron's cause with the Queen, as long as he thought that by pleading that cause he might serve himself. He pleaded that cause as long as he thought that he could plead it without injury to himself. But when it became evident that Essex was going headlong to his ruin, Bacon began to tremble for his own fortunes. What he had to fear would not indeed have been very alarming to a man of lofty character. It was not death. It was not imprisonment. It was the loss of court favor. It was the being left behind by others in the career of ambition. The Queen looked coldly on him. The courtiers began to consider him as a marked man. He determined to change his line of conduct and to proceed in a new course with so much vigor as to make up for lost time. When once he had determined to act against his friend, Lord Essex, knowing himself to be suspected, he acted with more zeal than would have been necessary or justifiable if it had been employed against a stranger. He exerted his professional talents to shed the Earl's blood, and his literary talents to blacken the Earl's memory, and so Lord Essex was put to death. Finally, Lord Macaulay sums up Bacon's vigorous and treacherous methods of serving the crown, and shows Bacon was a servile advocate that he might be a corrupt judge. Lord Macaulay described Bacon as one of the tools of power who persisted in a practice the most barbarous and most absurd that has ever disgraced jurisprudence, the most obstinate champion of the foulest abuses. Verily, Ego might with profit study the foregoing as well as the following lines. A robe of seeming truth and trust hid crafty observation, and secret hung with poison crust, the dirk of defamation. We'll pick up with chapter 13 on page 121 when we begin again.